The deadline is dead, and Washington hasn't said a word about what comes next. 3 days ago, a clock ran out. Not publicly, not with press conferences or breaking alerts. Quietly, in a classified meeting room somewhere in mid-April, the United States handed Cuba a 14-day ultimatum: release your political prisoners or face consequences. Cuba's answer wasn't delivered through diplomatic back channels. It came from a stage in Havana in front of hundreds of thousands of people, with Raúl's ghost still haunting every corner of the Plaza de la Revolución. President Miguel Díaz-Canel raised his voice and told the crowd, told Washington, Cuba does not surrender. The deadline passed. The prisoners are still inside, and the most powerful military on earth is sitting 90 miles off the Cuban coast, waiting. So what happens now? If you're just finding this channel, subscribe right now. This story is moving fast, and every update will be here first. Here's what we actually know. In mid-April, location undisclosed, no joint statement, no cameras, U.S. officials sat across from Cuban representatives and delivered a single demand: release high-profile political prisoners within 2 weeks. USA Today confirmed the deadline through sources familiar with the talks. No public ultimatum, no press conference, the kind of meeting that only becomes news when the other side doesn't comply. Cuba holds an estimated 1,000 political prisoners, according to Amnesty International's latest count. Many were arrested after the 2021 protests, the largest anti-government demonstrations in decades. Thousands took to the streets. Security forces arrested hundreds. Courts handed sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years. Artists, journalists, protest leaders whose names Americans may not know, but whose governments certainly do. The U.S. demand was blunt: free them all, in 14 days. No phased schedule, no negotiation. An opening offer framed as a final one. Cuba called them mercenaries. Agents of a foreign power, criminals destabilizing the revolution. There was no middle ground before the meeting. There was less after it. But here's the question nobody in Washington is answering right now. If this was always about human rights, why did it take 65 years to set a deadline? While diplomats talked, the U.S. Navy moved. Since February, 4 destroyers have been patrolling the Florida Straits. 2 more circle Cuba's western approaches. Surveillance aircraft track every vessel in Cuban airspace. The Coast Guard quadrupled patrols around the island. Commercial traffic into Cuban ports dropped 87% in the first month. Venezuelan oil tankers, Cuba's primary energy lifeline, stopped arriving. The Pentagon called it enhanced maritime interdiction operations. The New York Times called it what it actually is: the first effective naval blockade of Cuba since October 1962. Guantanamo Bay went to heightened alert in March. Troop levels increased, exact numbers classified, but Reuters reports defense analysts estimate force strength doubled from peacetime levels. C-17 transports delivered equipment. Satellite imagery confirmed expanded vehicle parks and new temporary structures on base. 90 miles. That's all the distance separating what's being built at Guantanamo from what's being rationed in Havana. This is Chapter 17 of an ongoing series. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the moment, because Chapter 18 may be the one that changes everything. Diaz-Canel didn't wait for the deadline to expire before responding. He declared 2026 the year of defense preparation. Defense Saturdays became mandatory. Every eligible Cuban citizen required to participate in civil defense drills. Revolutionary Armed Forces conducted live-fire exercises near Havana. Anti-aircraft units deployed around critical infrastructure. For the first time since the 1990s special period, when the Soviet collapse nearly brought down the entire Cuban state, military reserves were activated. Veterans in their 60s received call-up notices. Units that existed only on paper suddenly had soldiers. Think about what that means for an ordinary person living in Havana right now. Blackouts from the energy shortage, military convoys rolling through the streets, air raid sirens tested every week, mandatory Saturday drills, and a government telling you, on every radio station, on every state channel, repeated hourly, "We do not surrender." The last time Cuba mobilized like this, the world came within minutes of nuclear war. And yet, sources familiar with the secret meeting told reporters the American delegation framed this as non-negotiable, no room for compromise. Which raises a second question nobody wants to say out loud. Did Washington expect Cuba to comply? Or did they expect exactly this? Here's where this gets complicated. The 2026 midterms are 6 months away. Trump's approval numbers in Florida have slipped according to recent polling. Cuban Americans in Miami-Dade County are one of the most politically activated voting blocs in the country. The 2-week deadline is short enough that Cuba can't use diplomacy to run out the clock until after November. Long enough that the administration can say it gave peace a chance. Trump appeared at a rally in Nevada, part of a 2-day swing through states that could flip congressional control, and said without elaboration, American military might will usher in a new dawn for Cuba. He didn't say when, he didn't say how, but the phrasing carries weight. That's the language of action, not posture. If Cuba had released the prisoners, Trump claims a historic victory. Cuba refused. So now whatever comes next, that too becomes a campaign moment. The structure of the ultimatum guaranteed a political win either way. The question is, who pays the price for it? In October 1962, Kennedy ordered a naval quarantine of Cuba, 13 days. Khrushchev blinked. Soviet ships turned around. The missiles went home. The world exhaled. That crisis ended in compromise. The U.S. quietly removed missiles from Turkey months later. Neither side got everything. Both avoided catastrophe. This moment echoes that one in geography, in naval positioning, in public rhetoric about hemispheric defense. But the architecture of resolution is entirely different. In 1962, there was a Soviet Union to negotiate with, a third party with leverage over Cuba, and a rational interest in survival. Today, Cuba stands essentially alone. Venezuela offered words. Nicaragua offered words. Russia is stretched across Ukraine, Syria, and Africa. China has invested billions in Cuban infrastructure, but has never stationed military forces in the Caribbean and shows no appetite for confrontation 90 miles from Miami. No hotline, no third-party leverage, no established de-escalation protocol. Just two governments, one with a blockade in place, one that just called mandatory military drills, staring across 90 miles of open water. The State Department said on April 19th that all available options are under review. The Navy hasn't stood down, the deadline has passed, and somewhere, quietly, a second deadline may already have been set. Shorter, unannounced, and delivered through channels nobody is talking about yet. If that's true, you won't read about it until it's already over. Let me be precise about what is confirmed and what isn't. We know the U.S. issued a 14-day ultimatum in a classified April meeting demanding the release of political prisoners. We know Cuba did not comply. We know Diaz-Canel declared Cuba will never surrender in front of hundreds of thousands at the Plaza de la Revolución. We know the U.S. Navy has maintained a de facto blockade since February, cutting commercial traffic by 87%. We know Guantanamo's troop levels doubled. We know Cuba activated its military reserves for the first time since the 1990s. We know Trump told a Nevada rally that American military might will bring a new dawn to Cuba. What we do not know, whether Washington follows through with military action, or whether this is maximum pressure designed to force compliance without a single shot fired. What we do not know, whether Diaz-Canel's never surrender was a strategic position, or the last public statement before private concessions begin. What we do not know, whether the deadline that passed was the final warning, or whether a shorter, quieter one has already been delivered. 2 weeks. That's what the United States gave Cuba. The 2 weeks are over. The prisoners remain locked up, the blockade remains in place, and the distance between never surrender and a new dawn is now measured in something shorter than diplomacy. This is Chapter 17. We have covered the blockade, the secret terms, the tankers, the silence, the soldiers, the defiance, the red line, and now the deadline that passed without a word from Washington. I don't know if Chapter 18 will be a negotiation or something else entirely, but it's coming. Here's the only question that matters right now. Diaz-Canel stood before hundreds of thousands and said never surrender. Trump stood before a rally and said new dawn. One of them is not telling the full truth. Which one, and what happens the moment that becomes clear? Tell me in the comments. I want your read on this. If this breakdown gave you something the headlines didn't, hit like. It's the single most effective way to make sure this analysis reaches people who are actually paying attention. Subscribe if you haven't, and share this with one person who's been following Cuba. Because whatever comes next is not coming slowly. I'm your name. See you in Chapter 18.